You've got to be kidding me, Dave. You're letting her take the last spot? Frank's voice boomed across the rain-soaked lot, pointing a greasy finger. She'll scratch every rig from here to Sunday. The man he was talking to, the yard manager, looked uneasy. The woman in question just watched, her face unreadable. She pulled out her phone not to make a call but to start a video recording. When Frank noticed, his smirk faltered for just a second. The scene was the Big Rig Oasis truck stop in Ohio, on a miserable Tuesday night. The woman was Maya, a 10-year veteran of the road, standing beside her immaculate Peterbilt 389. The final open loading dock was a nightmare alley, a tight blindside back-in, sandwiched between a tanker full of milk and a flatbed with poorly secured construction materials. It was the spot no one wanted. If you believe everyone deserves a fair shot, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching from and write the word respect if you're rooting for Maya. Frank, a driver with a loud mouth and a bigger ego, had been turned down for the spot himself just minutes before. He saw Maya talking to the manager and immediately started his campaign of ridicule. For Maya, this wasn't just about parking. This delivery was for a new client, a contract that could finally let her hire a second driver and expand her one-woman operation. Failure wasn't an option. The public humiliation was just an unwanted bonus. The manager, Dave, was about to refuse her, but Maya showed him a message on her phone. He read it, his eyes went wide, and he simply nodded, handing her the paperwork. Frank and his buddies didn't see the message. They only saw a woman they thought was getting special treatment. They didn't know the message was from the owner of the entire distribution center, a man Maya had known for years. Their search for the truth would lead them to uncover a web of lies they had created themselves. The whole yard was watching now, a silent audience of tired drivers. Would she back down and let the bully win? Or was Frank about to learn a very public lesson? Dave, the manager, walked over to Maya, keeping his voice low. Look, Maya, Frank's a jerk, but he's right that it's a hell of a spot. The company's insurance won't like this if something goes wrong. Maya didn't take her eyes off the target. My insurance will, she answered calmly. It's my truck, my policy. I'll take full responsibility. Her confidence wasn't arrogant. It was factual. She knew her equipment and she knew her skill. She'd spent the last decade proving it in places a lot worse than a paved Ohio lot. As Maya began her walk around, pacing the route she would take in reverse, Frank continued his show for his friends. $50 says she gives up, he yelled. Another driver laughed. $50? I'll bet $100 she hits the milk tanker. They didn't see Maya as a fellow driver, but as an intruder in their world. A world of diesel, steel, and an unspoken hierarchy where they felt they belonged at the top. Maya ignored them. She measured the distances with her eyes. She made a mental note of the front tire position on the tanker and the overhang of the steel beam on the flatbed. This was her ritual. She didn't rush. Professionalism was her armor and her weapon. In the world of trucking, reputation was everything, and hers was spotless. Every delivery on time, every load pristine. She had built her small company, Iron Grace Trucking, on that reputation. This new contract wasn't just another job. It was the validation for all of it. The other drivers watched, some with the same contempt as Frank, others with genuine curiosity. An older driver, sitting in the cab of his Kenworth, just shook his head. He'd seen this kind of grandstanding before. He'd also seen skilled drivers shut the loud ones down. He decided to stay and watch. The rain began to fall harder, turning the asphalt into a dangerous dark mirror. Okay, Maya, it's your neck, Dave said finally, stepping back under the safety of the dock's awning. He gave her a thumbs up, looking more nervous than she did. The signal was all Frank needed. Somebody call a tow truck. We're gonna need a wrecker over here, he bellowed, and his buddies erupted in laughter. The crowd of onlookers had grown. Now at least a dozen drivers were watching the drama unfold. The pressure increased tenfold. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a performance. Maya climbed into the cab of her Peterbilt. The interior was clean and organized, a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. She shut the door and the sound of Frank's taunts was muffled, becoming a distant background noise. She could feel them watching, judging. A new obstacle presented itself. A warehouse worker, hurrying because of the rain, had left a pallet of empty boxes just inches over the line she needed to take. There was no time to ask for it to be moved. She would have to adjust her angle on the fly. With a deep roar, the Caterpillar engine came to life. The cab lights illuminated Maya's focused face. She didn't look at Frank or the crowd. Her eyes moved methodically. Left mirror, right mirror, backup camera. She took a deep breath, let it out, and put the truck in reverse. The rig gave a slight lurch backward. Frank crossed his arms, a victorious smirk already forming on his face. Here we go, boys. Showtime. He was right about one thing. The show was about to start. The sound of the powerful engine, the hiss of the tires on the wet asphalt, and the sudden quiet from the crowd created a palpable tension. Every inch mattered. Every move would be judged. The first turn of the wheel would determine everything. The Peterbilt's engine hummed, a low growl of controlled power. Maya began the maneuver not with a sudden jerk, but with a slow, deliberate crawl. She turned the wheel to the right, away from the spot, causing the massive trailer to swing left in a wide, counterintuitive arc. Frank let out a short, mocking laugh. See? She's going the wrong way already. But the older trucker in the Kenworth leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. No, she's not, he muttered to himself. She's walking it around. Maya was using a technique few drivers dared to attempt, especially on a blindside. By starting so wide, she was setting up a single, perfect pivot point. It required absolute knowledge of the truck's geometry and zero room for error. The slightest miscalculation would have her trailer smashing into the flatbed on her left. The crowd watched, their heckling dying down, replaced by a tense curiosity. This wasn't the clumsy fumbling they expected. This was something else. Inside the cab, a small notification lit up on Maya's dashboard display. Ambient temp 38 degrees. Road surface may be icy. The rain was getting colder, making the asphalt even more unpredictable. The time pressure mounted. This wasn't just any cargo. The message Dave had seen on her phone was from the logistics chief at University Hospital. The trailer was full of surgical robotics equipment, a last-minute emergency replacement for a unit that had failed. A team of surgeons was waiting for it. Every minute she wasted here was a minute a patient wasn't getting the care they needed. Frank's confidence began to crack. He had expected a quick failure, a crunch of metal, a surrender. Instead, he was watching a masterclass. The trailer's rear tires were now just inches from the edge of the flatbed, exactly where they needed to be. Maya wasn't just avoiding the obstacles. She was using them as guideposts. The misplaced pallet that should have been a problem was now her primary marker for the turn. She had incorporated the new obstacle into her plan instantly. A quiet ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Frank stood alone, his two friends having taken a subconscious step back. The initial turn was complete. The truck was now poised like a coiled snake, perfectly aligned for the final push. This was the moment. The setup was perfect, but the execution had to be flawless. With the trailer angled sharply, Maya did the last thing anyone expected. Instead of slowly backing in, she straightened the wheel, gave the engine just enough throttle, and then jackknifed the wheel hard to the left. For a split second, the entire rig, tractor and trailer, slid on the slick pavement. It wasn't an uncontrolled skid. It was a controlled, intentional drift. The back of the trailer swung around in a swift, graceful arc, gliding on the thin sheen of icy water. It was a move more suited to a race car than a 40-ton semi-truck. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was impossible. It was beautiful. Frank's jaw dropped. His face went from a smug red to a pale, clammy white. He understood the physics of what he was seeing. He understood the level of skill required to not only attempt such a thing, but to pull it off. It was a level he knew he could never, ever reach. In that single moment, his entire sense of superiority evaporated, leaving only a hollow, ringing shock. As the trailer swung into the bay, its rear was perfectly illuminated by the dock's floodlights. The crowd could now clearly see the logo stenciled on the door, a large red cross with the words, University Hospital Logistics, and below it, in stark black letters, urgent, life-saving equipment. The context of the situation slammed into the onlookers. This wasn't some trucker showing off. This wasn't about ego. This was a critical, time-sensitive delivery of medical equipment, and Maya was treating it with the deadly seriousness it required. Frank hadn't just been mocking a fellow driver. He'd been mocking a professional who was on an emergency run. He had been the one holding things up. The older trucker in the Kenworth just laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure appreciation. "I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Maya, her face still a mask of pure concentration visible in the side mirror, made one final, minute correction. The drift ended. The tires gripped. The entire rig was now perfectly straight, aligned with the dock as if drawn by a laser. All that was left was a straight shot back. With a loud hiss of the air brakes, the Peterbilt came to a final stop. A solid, satisfying thump echoed across the lot as the trailer's rubber bumpers met the dock pads. It was perfectly centered. There wasn't a single inch to spare on either side. Silence descended upon the yard, broken only by the patter of the cold rain. Then the silence was broken by murmurs. "Did you see that? Never seen a blindside like it. She drifted it in. On ice, too." Frank was a statue. The two drivers who had been laughing with him were gone. They had melted back into the shadows, wanting no part of his public humiliation. He was an island, isolated by his own arrogance. He had challenged a master, and had been so thoroughly, so completely defeated that there was nothing left to say. His weapon, his loud, obnoxious voice, was useless. Dave, the manager, walked out from under the awning, his feet splashing in the puddles. He wasn't nervous anymore. He was floored. He keyed his radio, his voice filled with a respect that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. "She's in. Receiving. You are clear to open Bay 4. Get this unloaded now." From his high perch, the old driver in the Kenworth looked down at Maya's cab. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. In the rigid, unspoken culture of the road, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. It was a sign of ultimate respect from one veteran to another. Inside the cab, Maya didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look for Frank. Her actions were all business. She pulled the red brake knob for the trailer, then the yellow one for the tractor. She began the shutdown sequence, the engine winding down with a low whistle. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She gathered her paperwork from the passenger seat, clipping it neatly onto a clipboard. Her movements were calm, economical, professional. She had a job to do. The spectacular part was over. Now, it was time for the paperwork. The stark professionalism of her actions was the final crushing blow to Frank's ego. The new challenge was stepping out of the cab. The physical test was over. The social one was next. How she handled this victory would define it. Maya opened the door, and the sounds of the truck stop rushed back in. She swung herself out and landed softly on the wet asphalt, the clipboard held firmly in her hand. Her growth was demonstrated in what she didn't do. She didn't search the crowd for Frank's face. She didn't smile in triumph. She didn't say a word. Her transformation was complete, not within herself. She already knew what she could do, but in the eyes of everyone watching, they no longer saw a black woman driver. They saw a legend in the making. Their perception of her and of what was possible had been permanently altered. Her path to the manager's office took her directly past Frank. He was still standing there, rain dripping from his hat, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. He flinched slightly as she approached. Maya walked past him without a single glance in his direction. She didn't acknowledge his existence. This silent, complete dismissal was more devastating than any insult she could have hurled. It told him, and everyone else, that he was irrelevant. He was a minor annoyance, a buzzing fly that had now been swatted. Her focus was on the job. She reached Dave, who was just shaking his head, a wide grin on his face. "Maya," he said, taking the clipboard. "That was, textbook. No, that's not right. They need to write a new textbook after what you just did. The hospital's been calling every 5 minutes. You just made their night." "Just tell them the package is secure," Maya said, her voice even. Before turning to go, she allowed herself one look back. Not at the crowd, and not at the pathetic figure of Frank. She looked at her truck. Her beautiful, powerful Peterbilt, parked perfectly in the most difficult spot in the yard, its trailer pressed against the dock, ready to deliver its life-saving cargo. She had overcome the obstacle, silenced the doubters, and done her job. Her growth wasn't a loud declaration. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence of a professional who let her actions speak for her. The road ahead was clear. As the warehouse bay door rumbled open with a loud screech, a team of people in lab coats and logistical vests rushed out. They looked anxious. One of them immediately began talking to Dave, gesturing toward Maya's perfectly docked trailer. The urgency was palpable. The subplot of the mocking crowd was over, resolved by Maya's sheer skill. Now the main plot, the critical delivery, was back in focus. The tension in the yard shifted. It was no longer about a driver's competence, it was about the consequences of delaying a vital shipment. But the real climax was yet to come. A sleek black sedan, completely out of place among the massive trucks, pulled into the lot and stopped near the office. The driver's door opened and a man in a sharply tailored suit stepped out. He was older, with graying hair and an air of absolute authority. It was Mr. Harrison, the owner of the entire distribution network. The man whose text message had granted Maya the spot. His sudden appearance sent a ripple of alarm through the remaining staff. Dave's face tightened. Mr. Harrison rarely visited his facilities unannounced. He walked directly toward the scene, his expensive leather shoes splashing through the grime. He saw Maya and a brief professional smile touched his lips. "Maya, thank you for getting this here. You know what's at stake," he said, his voice calm but firm. Then his eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the area. He saw the lingering drivers, the nervous energy of the manager, and the single, isolated figure of Frank Miller, who was still standing dumbly in the rain. Mr. Harrison's gaze hardened. He turned to Dave. "Was there a problem here, Dave? This delivery was supposed to be seamless. I was monitoring the truck's GPS and saw it was sitting stationary in your yard for 17 minutes. Explain." Dave swallowed hard. He looked from his boss to Maya, then to Frank. He knew he had to answer and answer truthfully. The stage was set. The judge had arrived, and he was asking for testimony. All the tension in the air coalesced around one question. What was going to happen to Frank? "Well, sir," Dave began, his voice strained. "We had a disruption. Frank Miller here was causing a disturbance. He was questioning the driver's ability to park in this bay." Mr. Harrison's cold gaze shifted to Frank. Frank, seeing the owner's eyes on him, seemed to shrink. He opened his mouth to make an excuse, to say it was just a joke. But before he could utter a sound, Maya spoke up. "Actually, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the rain-filled air. "There's no need for speculation." She held up her phone, the screen glowing. "I recorded the entire incident. This was the true turning point. Not the drift, not the perfect park. This was the checkmate. Her transformation from a victim of harassment to the architect of its consequences was now complete. She wasn't just a great driver. She was a smart business owner who protected her assets and her dignity." She pressed play. The phone's speaker crackled to life, shockingly loud in the tense silence. Frank's booming, arrogant voice filled the air. "You're letting her take the last spot? She'll scratch every rig from here to Sunday. Aposto 50 pratas que ela desiste. Alguém liga para uma empresa de reboque? Vamos precisar de guincho aqui." Every insult, every bet, every single word of his loud-mouthed, prejudiced tirade was played back for everyone to hear. The recording captured the laughter of his friends and the full scope of his unprofessional, dangerous harassment. Frank's face drained of all color. He was trapped, condemned by his own words, broadcast from the palm of the woman he had ridiculed. There was no denial, no escape. It was pure, undeniable proof. Mr. Harrison listened to the entire 2-minute recording without a single change in his stony expression. When it finished, he didn't look at Maya. He looked directly at Frank. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This company, this entire network has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. That is reason enough. But you didn't just harass another professional. You actively interfered with the time-sensitive delivery of life-saving medical equipment. You put your ego ahead of a patient's life." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he turned to his manager. "Dave, get his credentials. His carrier contract with the Harrison Distribution Network is terminated. Effective immediately. Call security and have him escorted off the property. Right now." The revenge was delivered. Not with a yell, but with a quiet, professional, and utterly brutal finality. Frank stood frozen, his mouth agape. "Wait. You can't. I've been driving for you for 15 years, he stammered out, his voice now a pathetic whine. "And you just ended that career in 17 minutes, Mr. Harrison replied without even looking at him. Security. 2 guards who had been standing discreetly by the office moved in. They were professional, firm. They each took one of Frank's arms. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by the hollow shock of a man who had just lost everything. They walked him toward the yard entrance, past his own truck that he would now have to arrange to have someone else pick up. The other drivers who had stayed to watch simply turned and walked away, melting back to their own cabs. The message was crystal clear. This is not tolerated here. With the scene resolved, Mr. Harrison turned back to Maya. The coldness in his eyes was replaced by profound respect. Maya, I apologize that you had to endure that at my facility. My actions spoke for me, sir, she said simply. Yes, they did, he agreed. And so did yours. He nodded toward her phone. That was smart, very smart. Iron Grace Trucking will always have priority status at any of my facilities. Send my office the invoice for the delay, and add a surcharge for hazard pay. I'll see to it personally. He shook her hand firmly, a gesture that sealed her status in the yard. As the hospital team began carefully unloading the precious cargo, Maya's work was done. Her arc was complete. She had faced prejudice, proven her superior skill, defended her business, and ensured justice was served, all without once lowering herself to her antagonist's level. She had won, not by being louder, but by being better, utterly and completely better. 3 months later, the lights of the big rig Oasis reflected off the polished chrome of a brand new Peterbilt. Maya stood beside it, but this time she was talking to a young woman in a new Iron Grace Trucking jacket, her first hired driver. The contract with Harrison's network had been so profitable she had expanded just as she'd planned. The atmosphere in the yard was different. Drivers nodded to her as they passed. A few even waved. The story of that rainy night had become a legend on the CB radio circuits, a tale of the quiet driver who drifted a rig into Nightmare Alley and got a loudmouth fired without raising her voice. The older trucker from that night saw her from his cab. He climbed down and walked over. Good to see you, boss, he said with a genuine smile. Heard you're expanding. Trying to, Maya said, smiling back. Good help is hard to find. Later, as her new driver prepared nervously for her first solo run, she asked Maya, Aren't you worried? What if they give me a hard time out there? Maya looked at the young woman, then at the open road, and then back. She placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice steady and sure. Just focus on the job. Be professional. Be better. Let your actions do the talking. They always speak loud enough. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that skill, professionalism, and integrity speak louder than prejudice. Frank learned his lesson the hard way when his own words came back to seal his fate. What did you think of the justice he received? Was it a fitting end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you watched until the end, show your support for stories like this and comment with, I watched until the end to let us know you're part of our core community. Your engagement helps us bring more narratives like Maya's to the screen. We have another story of triumph over adversity waiting for you right here on the screen. It's about a chef who was underestimated and proved everyone wrong. Click on that video now and we'll see you there.